Self-realization is the ending of ignorance, the dispelling of ignorance. Ignorance at its root has ignore, meaning something is being ignored in ignorance. It's a state of ignoring something. It's not a state of not knowing something. It's a state of ignoring what is primary, what is closer than any knowledge, ignoring that for some suffering, for some problem, for some identification. And that ignorance is the root of all suffering. So I don't come here to teach you what it is you must be or see, or even how to get that. But I come here to point as strongly and as clearly as I'm able to that which you have ignored in favor of suffering. There's a spiritual term which has been grossly misunderstood. I believe it must come from some mistranslation, and that's that ignorance is bliss. Yeah, ignorance is not bliss. The open mind is bliss. Not knowing even is bliss. But ignorance, ignoring that which is crucial, ignoring your own self, ignoring the presence of God, the eternal presence of God, the limitless truth of yourself. Ignoring that is the source of all tragedy. So we will spend very much time together pointing, exposing, diving into what has been ignored in favor of suffering. So in a moment, in a split second, there's the possibility to recognize the truth of yourself. The boundless, limitless, eternal God truth of yourself that has been ignored. And that has different names in different spiritual cultures. Nirvana, heaven, resurrection, satori, samadhi, enlightenment. And it is beautiful and empty of suffering, full of grace. I know that most of you in this room have glimpsed that, and many of you know that to stop for a moment, you recognize yourself to be that which you have ignored. To retreat from suffering does not mean to ignore suffering. The retreat is from the fixation on suffering. It doesn't mean you substitute a fixation on nirvana or emptiness or samadhi. It means you recognize that you have the potential and the capacity to realize yourself as the totality of life, the totality of being. And to the degree that you are willing to give up your ignorance, both of suffering and of that which has never suffered, is the degree that you are willing to know yourself, to realize yourself. So I found in my travels that often people begin the spiritual life as an escape from the worldly life, as escape from the miseries of life. And this is legitimate. but it's the way one begins, it's not the way one ends. The ending, the surrender, is a recognition of no escape and no escape needed. That in the embracing of that which is here in consciousness, rather than ignoring any of it, and the embracing of consciousness with consciousness itself, then there is no longer any of the conditioned belief that you are different from anyone else, that you are less than or that you are greater than, that because you're a different tribe, that you're better or worse than, or a different nation, or even enlightened versus ignorant. These distinctions finish. It's all oneself. And your willingness to be true to who you are is your willingness to see yourself everywhere. I had a beautiful radio interview yesterday, and one of the questions she asked me was, does it matter what's going on in the world? That there's hatred, that there's continuing violence, continuing genocide. Yes, it matters. It matters. Because it is a reflection of your own mind. There is nothing that is going on in the world that is not going on in your own mind. And in your willingness to see that, to experience the horror of that, and to see what is untouched by that, then you are at least one aspect of consciousness that knows itself to be free.
What is the, what is like, when we say I want, you can be still, and, it's interesting because I can just feel the certain eroticness there hovering around
this kind of impulse.
Suddenly it's like, like you say, just stop, but the slogan is just do it.
That's right. That's right. Just do it. And then you learn, some kind of spiritual jargon or some ways of getting around it. But I'm not doing it, it's just happening. Or, it did it, I didn't do it. Or I'm awake, so it doesn't matter what I do. And I'm awake, and if I do it, it means it's holy. I mean, it goes on and on. So the invitation is to really, it's not a matter of doing it or not doing it, really. But the invitation is the invitation to experience this impulse of the addiction, which is primarily an addiction to pleasure, but is also wrapped up into that, is the addiction to suffering. So it's to experience both the desire for this pleasure object, which, even though you may know intellectually very well, will lead you down this same old path, there is a kind of infatuation and attachment to it. So there's energy there. There's power there. So the invitation is to experience all that. And I'm shaking because it can be like a shaking, because everything is saying, just do it. So the willingness to not go numb or dissociative in that, because that's also another power, and it can be learned, but to experience it as this burning.
The bonfire.
A bonfire. The bonfire of the vanity. Really, because it is a vanity, because it's for me. So I want to be really clear here, because I'm not saying you should do this if you have a desire. That's not what I'm saying. Because there's certain desires that are totally harmless. You know, you have a desire to eat, eat. You have a desire to rest, rest. You have a desire to speak, speak. But if you have a desire to eat and it is neurotic and causes painful, or your desire to rest is neurotic and causes pain, and your desire to eat or speak is neurotic and causes pain, or your desire to have sex, or your desire to be powerful, or your desire to get enlightened, if it's this pleasure-suffering desire, there is a possibility to stop. And what's required in that stopping is this willingness to burn in this impulse that says, go. Go now. With all of the very sophisticated justifications of why it's perfectly okay. This time, again, one more time, last time, to go. Yeah. So go, as you did, so go. But watch, tell the truth. Consciously go this time. Consciously choose it so you can tell the truth, so you at least don't have that level of justification to fall back on. So you bust yourself. And this is, a lot of people say, well, don't want to do that because you want to have this little out. If it gets too intense, I'll go. I'll just do it. But if you don't give yourself that out, if you don't give yourself that exit, that's a kind of crucifixion where there is this willingness to, okay, if it kills me, I am not going to move in this moment. And it is a crucifixion. It's what the crucifixion points to. I am not moving. And even if I scream, why is God doing this to me? I'm not moving. And in that, there is the discovery of the resurrection, the redemption, the peace that is inherent. And with that discovery, naturally, then this bondage to this addictive habit is at least weakened. The link is weakened. Maybe it's cut totally. But assume it's just weakened. It's more skillful. Assume it's weakened, but then the next time it arises, there is this, then there's choice here. You know that you are not run by your impulses or instincts either, no matter how strong they may be and appropriate in certain cases or times, stages of life. But when you're speaking of freedom, when you're speaking of stopping the search, then there has to be this willingness to face what it is you are running from in your search. And in general, you're running from some pain. And really, it's usually some infantile pain that couldn't be met or wasn't met. And it's psychological, and it has physical components, and it has a story, or not. It could be just energy. When I met Papaji, and he said, stop, it's like I could hear all the reasons not to stop. Well, first of all, who is he telling me to stop? If I stop, what if he takes over my mind? What if something bad happens to me? I mean, it's not safe to be innocent. It's not safe to not think and figure it out and go for what's safe and avoid what's unsafe. So, of course, that's all has its place. I'm not saying stop in the middle of the street. Obviously, go across the street. This is obvious. But we then take that and put it all the way through into our psyche, into all of our psychological dilemmas. But why not investigate it? And that's what his invitation to me was. Investigate this for yourself. Not stop because it's the good thing, the holy thing, the right thing, the enlightened thing. It's not. It's none of those. It's just what has never been done. So there's at least in that moment some freshness, some innocence, and some recognition of the power, of the potential of simply being. Simply being. Not getting the pleasure, not keeping the pain away, not getting another day of life, not avoiding death. Just being in this moment, in this instant. And it's beautiful. And it's the doorway. It's the same doorway. It's the same gateway. Because there's something that is transmitted in that moment that reverberates potentially deeper and deeper for the rest of the life of this body. So that your mind is not preoccupied with justifying, grasping pleasure or avoiding pain. It doesn't mean you don't grasp pleasure and avoid pain. You may or you may not. It may be appropriate to avoid pain. There's nothing wrong with taking pain medication. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a good time. But that you aren't bound to it. And when that much of your attention is freed, that's a lot. It's a lot of attention that's freed, that's available for real questioning, that's taken off that kind of habitual cycling that you were speaking of. There is a widespread addiction to suffering that is based on getting what I want. It's a kind of immaturity and a resistance to maturity, a resistance to not getting what I want. And that play, seeking what I want and resisting what I don't want, is the story of your personal suffering, individually and collectively. And the unwillingness to actually see what it is that causes your suffering is what stops you from hearing what must be heard. Are you willing to see what causes your suffering? You know the truth to that, much more than I know about you. Are you unwilling to see? If you are willing to see what causes your suffering, then you are willing for everything to change. Everything. Yes, it gets radical. That's where we start backing away. Well, not everything. I'm willing for what causes me suffering to change, but nothing else. But in your willingness to see what causes your suffering, you will see perhaps you don't even know what causes your suffering. And to be willing to see what it really is opens up a whole possibility of your entire life changing, of nothing being the same. And see, this is when most people start kind of backing up, because there are some very wonderful aspects to your life that you don't want to lose. You only want to lose your suffering. Until there's a willingness to lose everything, even not wanting to, but a willingness to to see what it is that causes your suffering, then there's an impossibility of really, truly hearing this that must be heard, that is within you, that is calling your name, that is calling itself home, that is saying, now, now. I can remember reading great teachers and sutras and nodding with the reading or the teaching or meeting great teachers, and I know that's true, I feel that's true, and then leaving the room and going right back into my particular neurotic infatuation with suffering. Seeking happiness, of course, in my particular way. But the maturity that I'm speaking of, and that I'm really invoking, the maturity is the recognition that my way doesn't get me what I truly, finally want. It gets me great pleasure, gets me great drama, gets me great gain, great loss, great pain, great sadness, but not what I truly want. So if you can even catch a glimmer of that within yourself, and feel perhaps the terror of that, of what it really must mean to be free, what it really means to be at peace, and what is really demanded of you, which is everything, then you can hear. Then hearing is natural.
Most of my clients, they're in the victim role, and
Yes.
they are very self-destructive, and then
Yes.
we try to...
Is that familiar? Just take a moment. That is a mental health problem, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
it makes me sad.
Yes.
If I see people destroy their opportunities, it makes me sad, and
So
I don't
you
know what to
become
do with it.
victimized by their victim story.
That's correct. I want them to do good for themselves.
Yes. You want them so they'll stop bothering you with their victim story. I know what you mean. I wish you would wake up so I could take a walk.
I want them to be happy.
Yes, be happy, damn it. You're bringing me down again. I can relate to your story. Can relate to it. It's an edge, isn't it? It's an edge to work with people who are suffering greatly.
Who want to suffer? It's like
Yes, who want to
they
suffer,
hold
and
on
you don't
to
want to
it.
suffer,
They hold
and you
on
have
to
to-
it.
so how is it you
I don't
are
get it.
suffering?
Why do they do that to
I'm
themselves?
pointing to how it is they do it.
Why do they do that?
They
to
do it
themselves?
exactly the same reason you do it to yourself.
Well, I'm usually trying to be happy.
But not right now. Well, same thing. They're trying to be happy. They're trying to be happy, very desperately. So how is it, though, I'm quite serious in this, How is it their suffering makes you unhappy? What is it you have to do with their suffering to make yourself unhappy with it?
Well, it's their suffering, I suppose.
Well, that's true. That's fine. We know that. But there's something that happens that makes it your suffering. And I just want to know what that is. Because then you will have a real cue or clue as to what the dynamic that they try to be happy and can't be happy, how that operates.
Maybe letting go of the sense to be responsible for the happiness.
No, this is, now you're looking for a solution. I'm asking you to look and see what is the mechanism. What is the mechanism in your thought process? What is the moment where their suffering makes you unhappy? I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I don't think it is a bad thing. So I'm not saying it's something you should correct. I think it's actually quite useful. Then you get to experience unhappiness, and that actually, your heart can break even wider. So I'm not saying correct this, but your question to me was, why is it they do this? How is it they do this? And the answer to that is found in how and why you do this.
Okay.
So are you aware of some story that you tell yourself about, maybe take a particular client in your mind that after you have been with, you're sad because they won't get off it or they won't stop suffering? What do you tell yourself?
Well, I tell myself this is an intelligent person, and they ought to know. This is tries to be spiritual. Reads literature, so they ought to know their God and live as if they were.
That's right.
And how come they can't translate what they know into their actions?
Yeah, so now we're speaking of the paradox. This is brought exactly the point of our meeting today. This is an intelligent being who has had experiences of God, spiritual experiences, and yet still they continue to be unhappy, to suffer. They can see what they do. They can see the consequences of what they do. So we're not speaking of someone who can't see that.
No, I'm talking about intelligent people.
Yes, good. I'm happy you are, because that's where the paradox is.
Yes.
So if you don't fix this paradox in yourself or in them, just for a moment, I love that your work is to fix it. But just for this moment, you don't fix it with philosophy and you don't fix it with religion. You don't fix it with what they should be doing. You don't fix it with what they are doing. You just meet the paradox. Here is intelligence and gross ignorance. Because you're speaking of ignorance.
Yeah.
How is it that the two coexist?
Yeah. I don't know.
That's the beginning. And in that saying, I don't know, is there an energy that you feel or an emotion?
Yeah. I don't want to say sadness.
But there is.
Yeah.
There is sadness there, I can see it. Yes, there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with sadness? You see, in our simplistic view of spirituality, we keep sadness out. But what if you invite this sadness that is there in closer? What if you meet this sadness with your full being, with your full intelligence? Not with spiritual or psychological or philosophical shields, but just directly. What? What's that?
I get like a slide, downward slide.
Yes. So let's go down. We go together.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's drop in something deeper even than sadness.
I don't want to.
I know. I understand that. But just for the purposes of investigation, for discovering a why and a how that has not been discovered, let's go together where you don't want to go.
Okay.
What are you experiencing?
Like hopelessness.
Yes, that's right. That's deeper even than sadness. So let us go into hopelessness just as you went into sadness. Not keeping it out because it's not spiritual, it's not intelligent, it's not psychologically hip, but just to meet it. Not indulging it with some story, but meeting it with your intelligence.
It feels like dissolving of everything. Everything is dissolving, and there's no more form.
Yes, let it go. Just for our purposes. Let it all go. In this experience of dissolution, which is different from a theory of dissolution, in the direct experience.
Well, actually, for me that's okay.
It feels all right, doesn't it?
For me it does.
For everyone.
It's like, well, who cares, really?
Really, but not a casual who cares. It's really, it's a like, beautiful experience.
Yeah.
It's an
absolutely.
Experience of joy and laughter.
Yeah, it's the opposite of control.
Yes. So you have clearly experienced that in other realms.
Oh yeah.
But in this realm of like being with your clients or being with aspects of yourself without the shield of either substance or practice or mantra or amulet or ritual, without the shield of that, and there's nothing wrong with any of that. It all has its place, it's all beautiful, it all serves. But in a moment of just nakedly meeting what hasn't been met, then there is another opportunity for dissolution.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not bad.
At the very least, it's not bad. And in the beginning of not wanting to go there, there's a sense of it's bad. Yes, that's right. That's right. I don't want to go there. That's right. So we go together. In a moment. While you have resisted, even without knowing it, or resisted in others, as you were speaking, in your clients, their suffering, their sadness. If there's resistance to it, doesn't matter if it's in them or if it's in you, it's really all the same. There's a possibility to meet it in a deeper, conscious, naked way that has nothing as the cause of the dissolution other than the meeting. This morning's session really showed so clearly, in a couple of instances, how no matter what the world is telling us, if our internal story of what's occurring has to do with being victimized, then we suffer. It's very simple. And if you are quite certain that you aren't telling yourself a story of being a victim and yet you're suffering, then I suggest you're lying to yourself. That there has to be some thread of some ancient story of how you have been wronged. How God has wronged you, or how your parents have wronged you, or how the nature of things has wronged you, how circumstances have wronged you, as you have wronged yourself. All of that is a story of being the victim. Being a victim. Even the strongest aggressors, if you just crack the superficial layer of aggression, you find this, I've been wronged. And so the striking out in anger or revenge or getting even has to do with this same victim story. If you can see this, if you can see how it plays in your life, that's very good. Because when you can see it, you can see that it must be recreated each time it plays. There's some past momentum that allows it to surface, but to be played through, it has to take energy and attention and belief, emotion, and some pleasure with the pain. So the willingness to tell the truth about who it is you are is a willingness to no longer be a victim, regardless of pain, regardless of circumstances, regardless of others, regardless of the real horror that occurs in the world. To no longer be a victim of that doesn't mean to trivialize that or deny that or gloss over that or repress that. It means that you are encouraged in whatever appears or occurs or is experienced to meet fully the experience, to not have to hide or run or justify or wail or curse or moan, just to meet it. To be willing to be annihilated by it is the same willingness to discover directly what can never be annihilated. Just this thread of a story, which is composed of thought, which is nothing at all. What power! This is the power of mind, one of its powers. The simulation of reality. A story about a reality. A story about a life. Are you willing to let your story go? And all those horrible aggressors to go unpunished? There's a certain point, where you just call it off. Yes, you have suffered at the hands of others. Yes, there has been horrible suffering done, and you have been on both ends of it. You have perpetuated it, and you have felt it directed at you. Are you willing just to say, enough? No one can end it but you. That's where your freedom is. You are free to suffer. And you are free to stop suffering. I invite you to experience stopping suffering so that you consciously are free, so that you consciously choose to suffer or consciously choose to let it go. That's the bondage, is being unaware of the choice to be free and the choice to suffer. So I am letting you know there's supreme, ultimate choice now and forever. It's up to you.
I'd like to talk to you about addictions. My addiction is alcohol, and I recently had a relapse, and it's something that I've struggled with all my adult life, at least. And I guess when we were having that little lesson or practice earlier today about
what do you need to be happy?
What do you need to be happy? I said sobriety, and then they asked me if that was true, and I waver on that one, and maybe I have it mixed up in my head about your teachings. But when I say that, yes, sobriety does make me happy. Because I'm more present with myself.
That's great. So what is it about sobriety? And you just said it. I'm more present with myself.
More present with myself.
And what is it about alcohol? You're less pleasant.
You're
absolutely. Numbed out.
I'm numbed out.
Right.
I get very introverted.
That's right. So then what is it about the impulse to be numbed out, to be introverted? What drives that? I mean, I understand that there's a physiological component, but what's the emotional component? Where you feel the desire, and you know that you don't have to follow that desire because you have experience with not following that desire.
Right. It seems like I continually. It's for me. It's like almost running away from myself.
In the alcohol.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Instead of hiding.
That's addiction.
Yes.
That's addiction there.
That's pretty much what I feel. And in AA, we always raise our hands. I am an alcoholic, and with your teachings, sometimes I think my relapse is because my mind was thinking that I was invulnerable.
Yes.
Because, if I'm so spiritual now and I'm so together,
I can have a drink.
How can alcohol affect me?
Right.
Basically, that's what happened.
Yes.
I was in Brussels and on my first European trip, and that's basically what happened.
I've heard this from a number of people, not just about this teaching, but about any teaching.
Right.
How the mind will take it and use it as it likes.
Right.
As it likes. That's why when I was speaking about the impossibility to teach, because once it's made into a teaching, something that can be remembered, I am immortal self, I am invulnerable, so therefore I can do what I want to do. What's the harm? So you know the harm. You have experienced the harm. It's as someone just said, maybe it was Linda was just saying, life sends you a cure for your arrogance. And that's, boom.
Right.
It's like, whoa. So what is it that was meant by this statement, I am invulnerable? Does it mean the body is invulnerable?
No.
No, that's right.
It doesn't.
It does not at all. And particular bodies have particular needs. Particular nervous systems have particular needs. Today, when we were speaking about what is needed, the design of that was to drop your mind into the truth of who you are that needs nothing. You need nothing. Your body needs something. It needs sobriety. That doesn't mean you are an alcoholic. Let us say your body is an alcoholic. But it's very useful to stand up and say, I'm an alcoholic. Because as you know, one of the major supports for addiction is denial of that addiction.
That's right.
It's major. So the willingness to expose oneself and say, yep, me, I'm an alcoholic, is very useful. It's beautiful. It's a kind of blade or fire. And in the doing it, there's also a power that comes. I don't know the exact language of AA, but it comes from some source other than this I that is an alcoholic.
Right.
Comes from some source other than this body's alcoholic tendencies. That source, so we call it God, or truth, or self, that needs nothing.
Yeah, there's a saying in AA that we're as sick as our secrets.
Sick as our secrets. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Everybody hear that? That's really good. Really good.
And that's pretty much been my gig, is trying to expose myself from all my secrets.
Yes.
It seems to be very difficult.
What makes it difficult?
Fear, I think, is a big one.
And have you experienced the fear?
Acceptance. Yeah, I have.
So each time it arises, you have another opportunity to experience it deeper. And then fear is not the enemy. It may be fearsome, but it is the ally. It is the vehicle to the source that's bigger than the body. But you have to ride it home.
When you experience fear, do you just feel it? Do
you
just
begin
be
by
with
feeling it. You begin by feeling it. And the most important part is that you recognize there is perhaps some story about the fear. Either whatever story generated the fear, and now perhaps some story about how to get away from the fear, or even a story about if I experience the fear, then I'll get away from the fear. So you have to drop the stories so that fear is met. So it begins by feeling it, but it is deeper than feeling. Because under fear, deeper than fear, is something else, a deeper secret. Are you aware of that? Because we don't want this just to be theoretical.
I don't know how deeply I'm aware of that.
So let's see. Are you aware of the fear now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So with your consciousness, you drop into the fear. Real quickly, all the way in, and you tell me what's under it.
There feels like a peace.
A peace.
There's peace.
Okay, excellent.
Feels peace.
Drop into the peace with your consciousness. Anything under that?
I feel a little fear.
Yeah, so maybe the peace was not a real peace. It was like, okay, here's some peace. Now go away, leave me alone.
It was a mind peace.
That's right.
Yes.
It's So because you've learned, either from here or from your own experience, if you drop into the emotion, there's peace. But this is not about a learning or remembering. It's about an experience in this moment of meeting whatever it is that's being avoided. And in this case, it's fear. It begins with fear. Maybe a long time ago it began with anger. I don't know, but we're at fear now. I promise you, there is something under fear. and something under that, and something under that. There are secrets to be exposed. There may not be secret thoughts. They're secret emotions. And under the secret emotions are secret insights, secret revelations, and finally the secret of who you are, which is really the exposure. It's really what you're after, and really what you have run from. And in this non-teaching, you are stopped right here. Stopped. So that if you have been carrying a bundle up to this point, you get to meet it. You get to see what you have been carrying through life. And it's not always pleasant. It can be quite unpleasant, very painful, uncomfortable, miserable. But if your devotion is to the truth, and that's really what sobriety is, the truth.
That's right.
So if your devotion is to that, and it is, it is, you can bear anything. You can bear anything. And the more you are willing to bear, the more you do bear, the bigger your heart is, the more you can let in love in all of its forms. Love from another human being, spiritual love of God, love for nature, love for earth, love for yourself, love even for this alcoholic body. There was a beautiful man speaking yesterday evening here, the last one who spoke. Such innocence and unlearned realization, the bliss of being and the discovery of devotion. And he gave you such an essential teaching from his own experience. It was really, I've never heard it said better. When he finished speaking, he said, and yet with all of that, if I practice desire, I still suffer. It's so very simple. And that's the vigilance. Many of you have heard me speak about vigilance, and some people often think of vigilance as some kind of club held over one's head, the usual super-ego conditioned imitation of vigilance. But the real vigilance was what he was demonstrating when he said, if I practice desire, I suffer. What could be more simple? There was another beautiful man speaking last night who has dropped into sublime depths of experience. And yet there is a thread of desire, wanting something to last forever. It's quite exquisite, actually, because it's the very desire for happiness that can turn your mind toward self-investigation. So initially, this desire for happiness, or desire for truth, or desire for escape from suffering is very useful. It's an ally. And then it's poison. It's your enemy. So to want anything to last forever is to overlook what is always here. Because you have decided or concluded, well, it doesn't feel really good right now, so what I would like is what was here 5 minutes ago, or 5 months ago, or when I was a little baby, or what I read the saint had. And this is suffering. It's the practice of desire, because it takes some doing, it takes some effort. It takes imaging, it takes thinking and thinking about what's been thought. It takes comparing. It takes the energy of attempting to grasp, which is just the other side of the energy of attempting to keep something away. So it's a practice. And you might want to tell the truth. Is it your practice? I mean, everybody talks about their meditation practice. But in the interest of truth, you may want to really examine, what is your meditation practice? What are you spending your attention, your lifetime practicing? If you're practicing desire, you're suffering. If you're suffering, check it out. Are you practicing desire? This is self-investigation. Be willing to tell the truth. Be willing to die in the truth. Because usually the root of desire is some avoidance of you as you think yourself to be dying. So if you can just keep the feeling of enlightenment, then you're not dead. Or if you're eternal life, right? Or if you can just keep the feeling of happiness, then it doesn't matter if you die. But if you feel ignorant and unhappy, it matters. And you begin to practice not feeling that. And so much expenditure of energy, attention, time, money, your life, your soul. And then your life is ended. So it's very important to see how the mind can take anything, even the most sublime truth of, if you practice desire, you suffer, to make that an idol and worship that as the new religion and in support of the suffering. Tell the truth. Who is really suffering here? Where is the sufferer? The suffering is in the experience. Where is the sufferer? Not as a religion, not as a practice, or you will walk around saying, who is eating, who is sleeping, who is speaking, who is asking, who is hearing, and it becomes just another catechism. It becomes another vehicle of mind conditioning, but now with garlands and roses and spiritual trailings. The truth is more simple than can be practiced. Suffering is very complex and must be practiced to continue. Shall I say that again? The truth is utterly simple. It cannot be practiced. Suffering is utterly complex, and it must be practiced. If you are suffering, just as investigation, hear what I have said, and see if you are practicing your suffering. Don't try to substitute the practice of truth. That will just be an imitation of truth. And it will lead to more suffering. It will be your superego saying, bad boy, or bad girl, or hey, good, you did it right that time. That's the trap. In other words, be still. It takes no effort to be still. It is utterly simple. When you are still, when your mind is still, you have no name, you have no past, you have no relationships, you have no country, you have no spiritual attainment, you have no lack of spiritual attainment. There is just the presence of beingness with itself. If activity appears in that stillness and the stillness has recognized itself, then activity itself is seen as also stillness, like the particle in the wave. Since we are so conditioned and attuned to particular activities as being the definition of me, the definition of who I think I am, mostly we spend our lives overlooking the vast ground of stillness, the purity of being, the simplicity of being. When I speak of your heart, that's what I'm speaking of. When I speak of the core of every phenomena, that's what I'm speaking of. When I speak of what is met in self-inquiry, that's what I'm speaking of. Whether it be emotional self-inquiry as meeting a fear, or an anger, or a despair that may appear, or mental self-inquiry, meeting the actual I thought, investigating the actual thought, inquiring into the actual thought, whether it be circumstances that appear to be separate from you and yet victimizing you, to actually meet all bodies, physical, mental, emotional, circumstantial, to meet fully, to inquire fully into any body, is to discover this vast, simple presence of being, is to discover yourself as you are, regardless of what thoughts about who you are, or what you are, or where you are appear, to discover yourself as you are. This is not a practice. It cannot be practiced. If it's a practice, then there's a technique involved, and there's a right way, and there's a wrong way, and there's a certain amount of time. There's a duration, and you get someplace, and there's a reward. There's an attainment. None of that applies in stillness. Reward. Attainment. Just doesn't compute. The computer is off. The computer may be switched on again, but there's a shift in the experience of what gets called reality. There is an essential shift. It may be perceived as a tiny crack or a huge gulf. Doesn't matter, that's just perception. If it is the tiniest crack, it is big enough if you attend to it. Not practice it, Because if you practice it, you'll then have an image of it as crack or gulf, and you as somehow separate from that, and you as somehow having to get through that, or drop into that, or jump into that. And it's much more simple. All of that then becomes another religion, another trap of the mind in its infinite traps of suffering.